Hello, my name is Daniel J. Kim, and today we'll be learning about trigonometry basics. Trigonometry is basically a math topic that helps us find angles and distances of triangles, more specifically right triangles. So right here we have a right triangle, obviously with a right angle, and a circle with a line through the middle. This symbol right here is called theta, and its basic function in trigonometry to act as a point of reference in a triangle. And once you have a theta inside a triangle, it basically gives you more information about the triangle. So the side that's opposite to the theta, which is right here, is always called the opposite because it's opposite of the theta. And the side right next to the theta is called the adjacent, which is right here. And the side that's across the 90-degree angle, which is right here, is always called the hypotenuse. Now that we know all of the triangle's parts, we can now use the main functions of trigonometry. These main functions are known as sine, cosine, and tangent. And you'll usually be seeing them written as shown right here. And basically each one of these things, or functions, have a specific equation. And the equation is based off the parts of the triangle, the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. And so the equation for sine is opposite divided by hypotenuse, so we can just write it as this. The equation for cosine is adjacent divided by hypotenuse. And the equation for tangent is opposite divided by adjacent. An easy way to memorize all of these equations and names is by something called SOHCAHTOA. As you can see in SOHCAHTOA, we see that the S represents sine, the C represents cosine, and the T represents tangent. And the next two letters that follow each of these are basically equations. You have O and H, which is opposite divided by hypotenuse, A and H, which is adjacent divided by hypotenuse, and O and A, which is opposite divided by adjacent. So here we have one example problem, and we have a right triangle with the sides 2.8, 4, and 4.9. And we have an angle of 35 degrees, which will be our theta. And basically our question is to find the sine of this triangle. So if 35 degrees is theta, then we know that 2.8 is the opposite, and that must mean 4 is adjacent, and 4.9 is hypotenuse. Since we want to find sine, we would have to use opposite divided by hypotenuse. And since we know these values, we could just input them in. And so we would get 2.8 divided by 4.9. And that would equal about 0.57. So basically 0.57 is basically the sine of 35 degrees. And just something to keep in note that any sine, cosine, or tangent of any angle will always be the same no matter what. This means that the sine of 35 degrees will always be 0.57 and nothing else. For example 2, we have a right triangle with a hypotenuse of 20, a side that we don't know of x, and we have an angle of 45 degrees, which we will call theta in this case. And so basically if we want to solve for x, which is what we want to do, we know that since this is theta, x would be the opposite side, and since 20 is the opposite of the 90-degree angle, 20 would be hypotenuse. Since we have opposite and hypotenuse, that means we have sine, and sine is opposite divided by hypotenuse. And we could just input the values and we get x divided by 20. But how do we exactly solve for x? Since we're doing sine, we have to use a calculator for this. And so if you have a calculator, you could just type in the sine of 45 degrees. So the sine of 45 degrees. And you would get about 0.7071. And so basically what do we do with this value? Since the sine of 45 degrees is equal to x divided by 20, because it's opposite divided by hypotenuse, you can make it so that 0.7071 is equal to x divided by 20. And in order to solve for x, you just have to multiply 20 on each side. And if you were to multiply 20 by this value right here, you get that x is about equal to 14.14. And so that's basically the value of x. The opposite side is equal to 14.14 units. And that's all for today, and thank you for listening.